Deputy President a little bit earlier on in Parliament in his maiden question and answer session which he took, and it's just ended a short while ago. But at the same time, the President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, is in Kigali in Rwanda for the AU Summit of Heads of States. Let's cross there now live, where he's part of a panel which is currently underway. Let's cross there.
Financing is not, though it's used as an excuse to explain why things are not happening, it's really not what the real bottleneck is. In an environment where you have excess global liquidity, why is trade finance difficult in Africa? Clearly there are some specific reasons, and I can go through a few of them and then talk about what the African Development Bank is doing. But the first thing that we're seeking to do is to unlock financing by institutional investors, both African and non-African. That's African sovereign wealth funds, pension funds and others, to come into the region and invest in trade finance. But there are again reasons why they're not coming in. Part of the reason has to be that the regulatory environment, the doing business environment and so on, is not conducive, not attractive enough. And that's why they seem to be staying away. They perceive risk to be much higher in Africa than it is anywhere else in the world, which in reality is not true, but it's a perception, and the perception has a premium in this case. So what we are trying to do at the African Development Bank is address these issues at several levels. One is through our own direct investments into lines of credit, into institutions such as the African Bank, the regional banks such as PTA Bank, and regional institutions such as Africa Trade Issuance Guarantee institutions. And what this does is two things. One, it provides financing for trade. And second, it helps de-risk these investment opportunities, so that through these institutions, we are both directly and indirectly investing to promote intra-Africa trade, both through direct investment and by de-risking the perceived risk by international partners.
Now, I'll bring in Benedict Orama here, because I know you wanted to respond to some of those things, but as you do, I want you to drill down on what Afrexim Bank is currently doing to contribute towards addressing the issue of the continental payment system, with, of course, a view to boosting the AFC, intra-African trade, and the AFC-CFTA in the context of the AFC-FTA.
Thank you very much. I wanted to respond to Brother James, because the switch he's looking for is just near him. We in Afrexim have been working over the years to put in place an intra-African payment and settlement platform. We are aware that it's not normal that only 12.8% of payments that originate from Africa end in Africa. And also, most of the settlements, all the payments from Africa settled outside, with 37% done in the United States. So we believe that having fragmented markets, fragmented currencies, will be a big burden on the expectations of the CFTA. So we have been working to put in place this platform. And that platform, the primary objective is to facilitate payment and settlements across borders in Africa, and to do it in local currency, to do it in such a way that it reduces the foreign currency component of intra-African trade. We are able to do this because we are not regulated by any central bank as multilateral. We have trade finance intermediaries around Africa. So we are able to provide the facilities and support the clearing and the settlement. We expect that this project will come on stream before the year end. We're going to start the pilot with 6 countries, which have been identified. So maybe around September, it will be on board, and subsequently from next year, it will be expanded. We've had extensive discussions with the regional payment systems, COMESA especially, and the West African payment system that is about to come on stream. The idea is that once we have it all done, to see how we can use that to integrate the payment platforms that currently exist. And we believe that that platform, once we start it and are able to gather data, we will be able to begin giving small trade finance lines to small operators that are able to use them. And it will be a vehicle for also formalizing informal trade, because many of the participants there will be the informal traders. If you permit me 1 minute, I will also address the issue of informal trade. Our own assessment in the bank is that the large proportion of informal intra-African trade, $40 to $60 billion, is evidence of institutional failure. It's because there are no institutions that currently conduct the trade. That is why a small trader will leave Rwanda, for example, with say $1,000 to go to Kenya to buy a few things and come here. If there are trading companies that do this, they will not engage in this expensive and inefficient way of trade. So we have also launched a program to promote export trading companies across Africa. One of the things we are doing is developing the regulatory framework that will make it possible for countries to register export trading companies, and we then provide lines of credit and provide domestic letters of credit to make it possible for those to buy from SMEs. I'm sure nobody here can tell me 2 or 3 South Korean companies exporting across the world. If you ask anybody about South Korea, they will mention Samsung. Samsung is also a major trading company, apart from being a technology company that we know it for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, through the day this has been an incredible platform where we've heard real plain speaking from some of the biggest voices in business saying what they want from policymakers, what they want from government. They're ready to come together and join hands under the AFCFTA and make it a reality, but they need to work with policymakers to encourage policies that work for them. You are one individual who has had a unique experience in life. You went from being a leading businessman in your country to being the leader of your country. So from that perspective, from having seen both sides of the coin, what are the changes that you're thinking about in South Africa with regards to changing the regulatory environment and fast-tracking policies that would ensure that all these things that we're talking about take off and effectively contribute to the continent's infrastructure needs?
Well, thank you. It's much more about thinking about, say, South Africa, but more thinking about the continent. And I think that's what we should focus on, how we can use this enormous opportunity of establishing a free trade area which covers the whole continent to unlock the great opportunities, the great capabilities that this can yield. I mean, clearly the very first one is the infrastructure process. We need to roll out infrastructure on the continent that is going to be able to support trade. Trade can only really take off if we have good infrastructure. And as they say, that if you really want to grow your economy, improve your infrastructure first. And this we should be able to do. As regulators, that's what we should focus on, but that's where we also need partners. We need a business community to be our partners, And we also need to work on how we can de-risk infrastructure projects so that we can attract finance for infrastructure projects that we can have across the continent. And having done so, we will then be able to utilize trade as a key grower of our economies. Because once you have good infrastructure, trade naturally follows. And I can say that, Africans are traders, and once you have good infrastructure, they will start trading on their own, and all we need to do as regulators is to set up good trading mechanisms and processes. For instance, the financial system needs to be in place. What I'm particularly attracted to is the notion that has been put forward about having a tradable currency. Now, I would support that, because for really good trade to take place on the continent, you need to know that you can trade effectively and trade profitably and utilize a currency that you can trade with right across the continent. And maybe setting up this free trade area means that we need to have an African currency that all of us can utilize. Now, if we look at, for instance, Europe, their trade started taking off once they had a single currency.
Yes, that's right.
The hour, the day, and the moment could have arrived for Africa to have its own currency, so that we get out of our heads this colonial mentality of relying on other people's currency. And we can match that currency with the others, so that you have an African, whatever you call it, matching 1-to-1 with the dollar. That'll be fantastic.
That would be beautiful. That would be beautiful. In fact, in the previous panel, I mean, this is a really innovative room here. Someone even mentioned the idea of a Pan-African digital currency, a Pan-African Bitcoin. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a good idea as well. I would support that, but I think it needs to feed into a notion of a currency that even a small trader, and we have plethora of small traders on the African continent, and the free trade area that we are going to create will just lift them up, and if we have a single currency, that will just make them fly. So that's what we should do.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm going to go back now to Diane and stay on this idea of SMEs. You're an SME, you face significant barriers to finance wherever you are in Africa. I don't think I've ever been to one African country where it's easy if you have a dream and you have the fortitude to pursue that dream, to find finance, to find capital when you're starting out. How do you think we can harness the free movement of capital through the CFTA to capitalize SMEs, almost as these, like, I guess you could call them vectors for Africa's transformation?
I think we need to start, of course, by saving more as Africans, but we also need to have a framework that connects banks. So in this forum, I've met a number of bankers from other countries, and we're already starting discussions and seeing how we can connect our banks more, because in some countries there's more liquidity than in others. So these banks need to be able to transfer the liquidity here, to be traded here. Because most times you'll see, I was meeting, for example, with colleagues from Angola, and they were telling me they have millions of dollars somewhere, overseas. And of course they don't get any return on that money. This is on a current account. And I was telling them, look, we have demand here. Maybe we can find a way to work together so we get a return and we also support the economy, an African economy. So obviously there are differences between countries, but there are obviously also some countries that have more savings, more liquidity than others. And we need to find a way to work together as Africans to really support our economies. Because ultimately, if the Rwandan economy is doing better, there'll definitely be spillover effects on Uganda and Tanzania and Kenya. And in the end, everyone benefits. So we really need to find a way to work together as banks. And we have continental and regional banks. We really need to find a way to connect to them so everyone is able to see which bank has more liquidity, how can we trade interbank, and we'll support each other and support our economies. I think we really need to get to that point. And the idea of having Pan-African digital currency is a great one. I think someone was saying in the previous panel that countries in Eastern Africa slashed the roaming fees before the EU did it. So there's also an opportunity for us to leapfrog and create our own currency. Because when you look at trade finance, I don't know for other commercial banks here, but it's extremely paper intensive, which comes obviously with risk of fraud, of errors. And we need to find a way to make trade finance more efficient, less risky, and we can only do this through technology. And there are today blockchain technologies with use cases that are being addressed for trade finance. We really need to get our young technology people here to try these technologies and make sure we can leapfrog and support our continent. Thank you.
And then when you're talking about new technologies, Gabriel, you're talking about instruments for financial inclusion. I mean, if you look at smartphones, if you look at mobile money platforms, as we build this free trade area, it is a tremendous opportunity to harness that technology and use it to bring more people out of poverty, financial inclusion. We talked about SMEs and the like. What is the African Development Bank's take on this with regards to the CFTA?
Thank you. The whole industry of the fintech, combining technology and finance, is something that I think whose time has come and is beginning to take off. And certain countries like Kenya and others in this region are far ahead of the rest of the continent. We at the African Development Bank, of course, see financial inclusion as a critical element of growing the financial sector. Now, given the size of the institution, it is rather difficult and perhaps not cost effective to work directly with the small SMEs that you and Diane have just discussed. But what we've been doing is supporting institutions across the continent to come up with innovative products and services. In fact, I dare say across the region, we are putting resources into new instruments, whether it's risk guarantee instruments or partial risk guarantee, credit risk guarantee, and other innovative products and services that promotes financial inclusion. But we do this through intermediary institutions, local banks. James Mwangi's Equity Bank is one of our partners, and several of the partners around this room have benefited from the support of the African Development Bank to promote innovation and financial inclusion at the SME level and even below.
Your Excellency, I'm going to break protocol and stand up from this, but I'm not asking you to stand up. I'm going to go down and I'm going to find, I know there are 4 people in the audience already that have interventions and questions or statements. So I'm going to go find them and get ready. Okay, so Prince Randy Alamsogan is from Benin Republic. Very interesting chap. He was in Kano recently on a solar project, investing in a solar project. Where are you, Prince Randy? Stand up and make yourself known. Prince Randy, you're doing some very interesting investing. This panel is probably the most important and interesting panel for you. What are your thoughts? Maybe you come over here so they can see you.
I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you, Mark, for having me. You've done a great work, by the way. I think Mark deserves a round of applause for his great, you know.
What did he say?
On his farm. Okay.
Solar panel on his farm.
Your Excellency, President Ramaphosa, distinguished guests, all your excellencies, thank you for being here today. I am Prince Randy Kusu Alamsogan from the Republic of Benin, from Abomey, more precisely. And actually the mother of former President Obasanjo is from there, it's from Benin. So it's a great honor. So Mark, on your recent comment, yes, I was in Kano, Nigeria recently. My firm, Black Lion Holdings, which is an investment management firm, we have about $8 billion under management since last year. We work a lot in the background, in the shadows, because what we do is that we support special purpose vehicles that are used to finance large infrastructure and energy projects in Africa. What we have done in Kano...
All right, we're going to come out of that AU panel that's taking place at this time. There's a number of them that have been taking place. President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe was on one a little bit earlier on today, but our own president, Cyril Ramaphosa, was there, and he's part of a discussion that's been taking place about business, and he was asked a few questions, one in particular where they said, with your experience as someone who's worked on both sides of the coin in the private sector and the public sector, what are you going to bring to the party? And he talked at great length about using this opportunity at this time to enable trade across the continent. And part of that is building infrastructure across the continent, because he said with infrastructure then comes trade, and then the trade will be what grows our economies. And so he says he's going to focus on the regulatory frameworks to make sure that that is enabled. Things like de-risking infrastructure spend, making it easier for investors to spend on infrastructure projects on the continent, and we would use the trade to grow once the infrastructure was in play. And he also talked about a tradable currency. He says maybe it's time for the continent to have its own currency. He didn't say what it might be called. I know that in the past a lot of people have talked about it being called the Afro or something like that. But there are already regional bodies in play like COMESA and SADC and ECOWAS, and he's saying that it's time to bring all of these together to have one continental body that would enable trade across the continent. And maybe that Afro or that African continent currency might trade at 1-to-1 to the US dollar, so that we wouldn't need the rest of the world if we were trading ourselves. So that was his contribution, but we've pulled away from there. In the meantime, though, the Defense Department has confirmed that President Cyril Ramaphosa is frustrated